Don't turn around. Annie stood just outside the iron gate, her small frame tense, her breathing uneven like she had rushed to stop him. But her eyes were steady. I remember, Daniel said, adjusting his cuff with quiet precision. His voice carried the calm authority of a man used to being listened to. You told me already. He glanced briefly down the street. My security team is waiting up ahead, he continued. They'll meet me there. Whatever this is, they'll handle it. That should have ended it, but Annie didn't move. Instead, her eyes suddenly shifted past him. Daniel noticed immediately. What is it? He asked. Annie didn't answer. She was scanning the street, now left, then right, and then she saw them. Across the road, near a parked van, two men. One leaned casually, but his phone was held too still. The other stood with his back half turned, pretending to check messages. But the lens of his camera was angled directly toward Daniel. Watching, recording. Annie's fingers curled into tight fists. They're here, she whispered. Daniel's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened instantly. Who? He asked quietly. The men, Annie said, her voice low. The ones I told you about. She swallowed. They're filming you. The guard stepped forward, scanning, but the men had already adjusted, blending back into the background like they had never been out of place. Daniel looked once brief, controlled, then back to Annie. A calculation began behind his eyes. Annie, he said, more serious now. This is not something you need to worry about. Yes, it is, she said immediately. The speed of her answer caught him off guard. They're not just watching, she continued. They're waiting. A light wind moved through the trees. Somewhere far off, a siren faded into the distance. They said it, Annie added. Yesterday. When you left, Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. What did they say? That when you go to your meeting, she said slowly, carefully, they'll call you. A pause, and they'll tell you something bad happened. Daniel didn't interrupt. They said you'll turn around, Annie finished, because you won't think. You'll just go. Silence settled between them. Then, suddenly, maybe you shouldn't go, Annie blurted out. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. What? Maybe you should cancel it, she said, more firmly now. Or wait, just for today. For a brief moment, just a flicker, something human crossed his face. Then it was gone. I can't do that, he said. Simple. Final. This meeting doesn't move, he added. Too many people depend on it. Annie stared at him. Then you have to promise me something, she said. Daniel didn't respond right away. He just looked at her. What? He asked finally. Annie stepped closer, her voice dropping, urgent again. If someone calls you anyone and says your family is in trouble. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. You can't go back. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. That's not how things work. Yes, it is, Annie insisted. Her voice shook now, but the words didn't. That's how they catch you, she said. They said it. They said if you turn your car around, they'll be waiting. They'll take you. The air felt heavier now. They'll make you scared, Annie continued. So you don't think, she pointed toward the road ahead. Your people are there, she said. They'll protect you there. Then, softer. But not if you go back. Daniel exhaled slowly. If I get that call, he said, testing the logic. You're telling me to ignore it. Yes. And keep going. Yes. Even if it sounded real. Even if it felt real. Annie nodded. It's a lie, she said. It's a trap. Daniel glanced once more toward the street. The two men had shifted again, but they were still there. He understood now. Not everything, but enough. Have you told anyone else? He asked. She shook her head. My mom's working, she said quietly. And they said not to tell. They didn't see you, Daniel said. Annie shook her head. No. A brief silence passed. Then Daniel nodded once. I understand, he said. And this time, it wasn't just politeness. He opened the car door and stepped inside. The door closed with a solid, controlled sound. Inside, everything felt ordered again but not untouched. Downtown, he said. The engine started. As the car pulled away, Daniel looked once through the tinted window. Annie stood at the gate. Daniel leaned back, eyes forward now. Pull the front gate footage, he said. Sir, the driver asked. Last 72 hours, Daniel replied. I want to see everything. Yes, sir. His phone buzzed a reminder of the meeting. Daniel turned the screen off. Daniel Carter sat still in the back seat, one hand resting lightly against his knee, the other holding his phone without looking at it. He was replaying a voice. "Don't turn around." He shifted slightly, his gaze lifting toward the front. "Camera feed," he said. The driver tapped the console. A small screen flickered to life between the front seats, pulling up exterior footage from the Carter residence. Daniel leaned forward just a fraction. "Start with yesterday morning," he said. The footage rolled. At first nothing. Then, at 8:12 a.m., two figures entered frame. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Pause. The image froze. One man leaned against a parked van, head slightly tilted as if listening. The other stood closer to the curb, glancing at his watch. Zoom. The driver adjusted the feed. Scar under the eye. Phone angled not casually, but with intent. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Run it forward." The men didn't move much. The timestamp jumped. Another day. Same time. Same positions. Same pattern. This wasn't coincidence. This was surveillance. And Annie had seen it before anyone else. His phone buzzed in his hand. He ignored it. "Pull audio logs from the perimeter mics," he said. The driver hesitated. "Sir, those only catch fragments." "I know," Daniel replied. A few seconds passed. Then, "He'll turn around." The voice was faint, broken. But there, Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around his phone. "Soon as he hears it. Don't miss the window." The audio cut. Daniel stared at the screen for a moment longer. Then, "Send that to legal," he said. "And security." "Yes, sir." He leaned back again. Everything Annie said matched. Not perfectly, but close enough. Too close to ignore. His phone buzzed again. This time, he glanced at it. Unknown number. He didn't answer. Same number. Daniel watched it ring. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Sir." Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen. Then, he declined the call. The ringing stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the phone buzzed again. A text message. Daniel opened it. "Call me now. It's urgent." No name. No context. Just pressure. He felt it, the instinct. That pull Annie had warned him about. Urgency over logic. Reaction over thought. He locked the phone. "Keep driving," he said. "Yes, sir." Daniel exhaled slowly. Then his phone buzzed again. Another call. Different number this time. He didn't need to look to know. The driver spoke quietly. "You want me to reroute, sir?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window. The phone kept ringing. He closed his eyes briefly. And for a moment, just a moment, he wasn't in the car anymore. He was back at the gate, a small hand gripping his sleeve. A voice that didn't belong to fear. "You can't go back." Daniel opened his eyes. "Do not answer any incoming calls," he said. The driver nodded. "Understood. And route everything through security." "Yes, sir." The phone stopped ringing. Daniel adjusted his posture slightly. "Get me Carter Holdings' internal audit," he said. "I want full access before I walk into that room." "Yes, sir." "And notify them I'm arriving on schedule." A pause. Then, more quietly. "And double the team at the building entrance." The driver nodded again. They had expected him to react. They had built their plan on that assumption, which meant they didn't expect him to think. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Let's see what happens," he murmured. Daniel looked down at his phone one last time. No new messages. No more calls. Just silence. He slipped it into his pocket. Decision made. No turning back. As the car pulled up to the building entrance, security was already in place. Daniel opened the door and stepped out. One of the guards approached. "Mr. Carter, everything's secure." Daniel nodded once, but his eyes moved quick, precise. No Vaughn, no Scar, no obvious threat, which meant they had moved, or they were watching from somewhere else. He adjusted his coat. "Let's go," he said. They entered the building. Inside, everything was polished, but Daniel knew better now. Control was an illusion, and somewhere out there, someone was still waiting for him to make one wrong move. He stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut. For a brief second, he saw himself, perfectly composed, untouchable, and yet, one sentence echoed in the back of his mind. "Don't turn around." If this story made you feel something, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The elevator began to rise. and Daniel Carter moved forward, exactly where they didn't want him to go. Daniel Carter stepped out of the elevator and into a world that ran on control. Glass walls, polished floors, quiet voices that carried power without needing volume. Assistants moved with purpose. Eyes lowered just enough to show respect without appearing weak. Every detail had been designed to signal order, but Daniel no longer trusted appearances. Mr. Carter, his assistant, Laura, approached quickly, tablet in hand. They're already inside. Conference room A. He nodded once. Any changes? He asked. Laura hesitated just slightly. There were a few last-minute additions to the agenda. Daniel's eyes flicked to her. What kind of additions? Financial clarifications, she said. From the Langford Group. Of course. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks slowly. Of course there were. They walked down the corridor together. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city below, cars moving like veins of light. People reduced to motion and purpose. Security? He asked quietly. Double presence at the main entrance, Laura replied. Additional coverage on the lower levels. Good. He paused briefly outside the conference room doors. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Calm, precise, untouched. Seep ice, but beneath that, he remembered the audio. He'll turn around. Daniel exhaled once, then pushed the door open. Inside, the room was already full. 5 men sat along the far side of the table. Expensive suits, relaxed postures. The kind of men who smiled before they decided how much you were worth. At the center sat Victor Langford, late 50s. Silver hair, a face carved by years of winning, in rooms just like this one. Daniel, Victor said, rising slightly, extending a hand. Right on time. Daniel crossed the room without hesitation. Victor. They shook hands. Firm. Measured. Testing. Daniel took his seat. Let's begin, he said. No small talk. No wasted air. Victor smiled faintly. I like that, he said. Straight to business. Folders slid across the table. Screens lit up. Numbers appeared. For the next several minutes, everything moved exactly as expected. Revenue projections, asset transfers, expansion opportunities. Clean. Too clean. Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes moving from one speaker to the next. Every number was polished, every explanation rehearsed, and every piece of it felt wrong. Not obviously, but precisely. Impressive margins, Daniel said finally, leaning back slightly. Especially given the volatility in the last quarter. Victor's smile didn't change. We adapt quickly. I'm sure you do. Daniel tapped the folder lightly with one finger. Walk me through the offshore allocations again. A flicker. Small, but there. Victor glanced at one of his associates. Routine diversification, the man said smoothly. Daniel nodded slowly. Of course. He let the silence stretch just a second longer than comfortable. Then, because from where I'm sitting, Daniel continued, his voice calm, it looks less like diversification and more like concealment. The room shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Victor's smile thinned. That's a strong word. So is fraud, Daniel replied. Silence. No one moved. Daniel leaned forward slightly now, placing both hands on the table. I reviewed your last 3 quarters, he said. The numbers don't reconcile. Funds are being redirected through shell entities that don't appear on any official documentation. One of the men spoke up quickly. That's an oversimplification. It's an understatement, Daniel cut in. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Victor studied him carefully now. You're making serious accusations, he said. Daniel met his gaze. I'm stating facts. A long pause followed. Then Victor leaned back, relaxed again, too relaxed. And yet, he said slowly, you still came to this meeting. Daniel didn't answer right away, because that was the question beneath everything. Why did you come? Because Annie told me to keep going. Because someone expected me to turn around. Because I wanted to see who benefits when I don't. Daniel's expression remained neutral. I don't make decisions based on assumptions, he said. I confirm them. Victor's eyes held his. For a moment, neither man looked away. Then Victor smiled again. Different this time. Colder. Then let's confirm something, he said. He gestured lightly toward the table. Your position here, your control depends on this partnership. Daniel didn't react. If this deal collapses, Victor continued, you lose leverage. Investors get nervous. Boards start asking questions. A beat, you understand that? I do. Then maybe, Victor said softly, you should reconsider how far you want to push this. There it was. Not a threat, not directly, but close enough. Daniel leaned back again, unmoved. I've already decided how far, he said. Silence settled over the room. Then, Daniel's phone buzzed. Once, short, sharp. Every eye in the room shifted, almost instinctively. Daniel didn't look at it. Victor did, just for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. There it is. Daniel felt it immediately. The timing, too precise, too convenient. His phone buzzed again, longer this time, insistent. One of the men across the table shifted slightly in his chair. Waiting, Daniel's gaze remained steady. On Victor, not the phone. Victor tilted his head slightly. Aren't you going to get that? He asked. Daniel said nothing. The phone buzzed again, relentless now. Daniel could feel it, the pressure building, not from the device itself, but from what it represented. Urgency, distraction, reaction, exactly as Annie described. They said you'll turn around, because you won't think. His hand rested calmly on the table. He didn't move. Could be important, Victor added lightly. Daniel's lips curved just slightly. If it is, he said, it can wait. The buzzing stopped. Silence returned, but now it felt different, heavier. Victor watched him, really watched him this time, not as a partner, not even as an opponent, as a variable that had just changed. Something didn't go according to plan. Daniel saw it, and in that moment, he knew. Annie had been right. He leaned forward again. Now, he said calmly. Where were we? No one answered immediately, because something had shifted. The balance, the expectation, the certainty that Daniel Carter would react like every other man in that room. He hadn't, and somewhere, outside that glass tower, someone was realizing their plan had just started to fall apart. Daniel tapped the folder once more. Offshore accounts, he repeated. Let's try that explanation again. His voice was steady, controlled, but beneath it, for the first time that morning, there was something new, not just calculation, not just power, but intention. He wasn't just here to survive the trap. He was here to break it. The silence after Daniel's words didn't feel like hesitation. It felt like calculation. Victor Langford leaned back in his chair, fingers loosely steepled, studying Daniel with a level of attention he hadn't shown before. Around the table, the others shifted small movements, subtle discomfort. The kind that came when a conversation moved off script. Daniel didn't rush. He let the moment breathe. Offshore accounts, he repeated, calm and precise. Let's not pretend we don't understand what we're looking at. One of the men to Victor's right cleared his throat. You're drawing conclusions without full context. Daniel's eyes moved to him. Then give me context, he said. The man hesitated, and in that hesitation, Daniel found confirmation. Victor exhaled slowly, almost amused. You always did prefer direct confrontation, he said. I prefer clarity. Victor gave a faint smile. Clarity is expensive in this business. Daniel didn't return the smile. So is prison. The word landed. Hard. For a split second, the room lost its polish. The careful choreography cracked just enough to reveal what sat underneath. Risk. Exposure. Consequence. Victor's expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. Careful, he said quietly. Accusations like that, they don't just affect us. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That's the point. A long pause followed. Then Victor shifted gears. Smooth, controlled. If you're concerned, he said, we can schedule a secondary review. Bring in auditors. Handle this internally. Daniel shook his head once. No, the answer came too quickly to be negotiated. Victor's gaze sharpened. No? Daniel tapped the folder again. This doesn't stay internal, he said. Not anymore. Across the table, one of the associates sat up straighter. You're escalating this unnecessarily. Daniel didn't even look at him. It's already escalated. Victor studied him again. Something colder settled into the space between them. You think you're in control here, Victor said. Daniel met his eyes. I know I am. Another silence. Then, a knock at the door. Everyone in the room turned. Laura stepped in, composed but alert. Mr. Carter, she said. There's a situation. Daniel didn't stand. What kind of situation? She hesitated just enough for him to notice. Your residence, she said. We've received a report. Daniel raised a hand, stopping her. The room stilled instantly. Laura froze mid-sentence. Daniel's eyes held hers. Who reported it? He asked. Laura blinked. An anonymous caller. Of course. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. The trap had just walked into the room. Victor said nothing, but Daniel could feel it. The shift in energy. The attention sharpening. The subtle anticipation. They're waiting for you to react. Daniel's voice, calm as ever. What exactly was reported? Laura glanced briefly at the others in the room, then back to him. An incident involving a member of the household staff, she said carefully. Maria, the name didn't need to be spoken. Daniel felt it. That instinct. Fast, immediate, human. Turn around. Go back. Fix it. Annie's voice cut through the moment like a blade. If someone calls you and says your family is in trouble, you can't go back. Daniel didn't move. Not even a muscle. What kind of incident? He asked. Laura's voice lowered. Possible injury. We don't have confirmation yet. Of course you don't. Because it's not real. Because it's designed to feel real. Daniel nodded once. Who's on site? He asked. Security team has been dispatched, she said. They're en route. Daniel glanced briefly at Victor. Just long enough. Victor's expression was neutral. Too neutral. Daniel looked back at Laura. Then they'll handle it, he said. Laura hesitated. Sir, I thought you might want to. No. The word was quiet, but absolute. Laura fell silent. Behind her, the hallway remained still, waiting. Daniel folded his hands loosely on the table. Keep me updated through official channels only, he added. No external calls. No unverified reports. Yes, sir. She nodded and stepped back, closing the door behind her. The room settled again, but the tension had changed. Victor leaned forward slightly. That didn't concern you, he asked. Daniel met his gaze. It did. Then why are you still here? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Because concern isn't the same as panic. A beat. Victor's eyes narrowed just slightly. Daniel continued. Someone wanted me out of this room, he said. That much is obvious. No one spoke. They expected me to leave, he added. To react. To stop thinking. His gaze moved across the table, resting briefly on each man. But I didn't. Silence pressed in again, this time heavier, more revealing. Victor leaned back slowly, and for the first time, he didn't smile. Interesting, he murmured. Daniel reached for the folder again, opening it deliberately. Now, he said, let's continue. His tone didn't rise, but something inside it had shifted. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore. This was exposure. You were explaining, Daniel went on, how those funds moved through 3 separate shell entities, without leaving a trace. No one answered immediately, because now, they knew. He knew, and he wasn't leaving. Outside the building, the city moved on unaware, indifferent. But inside that room, the trap had failed, and Daniel Carter had just made something very clear. He wasn't the man who turned around. He was the man who walked straight into the fire, and stayed there long enough to see who else burned. Daniel didn't speak right away. He let the silence sit long enough for it to become uncomfortable, long enough for everyone in the room to feel it pressing in from all sides. Then he closed the folder, softly, not a slam, not a gesture, just a quiet, deliberate motion. And somehow, that was worse. We're done here, he said. The words didn't sound like surrender. They sounded like a decision. Victor's head tilted slightly. Done? Daniel stood. Chairs shifted around the table. Not all at once, but enough. You've already answered my questions, Daniel continued. You just didn't realize it. One of the associates leaned forward, tension creeping into his voice. You don't have enough to walk away from this deal. Daniel adjusted his jacket, calm, composed. I'm not walking away from the deal, he said. A pause. I'm walking away from you. The words landed clean. No anger, no volume, just truth. Victor's fingers tapped once against the table, barely noticeable, unless you were watching closely. Daniel noticed. You think you can prove anything? Victor asked. Daniel met his gaze. I don't need to think. A beat. I already have enough to start. The room shifted again. Now it wasn't discomfort. It was pressure. Real pressure. Daniel reached for his phone, not reacting, not checking, just holding it, as if reminding himself it was still there. Silent. Useless to them now. "I'll be notifying federal regulators," he said, "and initiating an independent audit through Carter Holdings." One of the men let out a sharp breath. "You do that. You burn this entire partnership." Daniel nodded slightly. "Yes." Another pause. Victor leaned forward now, no longer pretending. "You understand what that means," he said quietly. "You destabilize this structure. You don't just hurt us. You hurt yourself." Daniel didn't blink. "Maybe," he said. Then, after a beat, "But I don't build things that only survive if they're dishonest." The words hung there, heavy, irreversible. Victor studied him, longer this time. Then, finally, he spoke again. "You didn't turn around," he said. Not a question, a realization. Daniel's expression didn't change. "No," he replied. Victor leaned back slowly. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked uncertain, not afraid, but recalculating, which meant one thing. They had expected him to leave, expected him to break, expected him to react, and he hadn't. Daniel picked up the folder and slid it neatly back into place. "Next time," he said, almost conversationally, "if you're going to set a trap," he paused, just long enough, "make sure the person you're trapping still plays by your rules." No one answered, because no one could. Daniel turned toward the door, each step measured, controlled. Behind him, no one moved to stop him, because stopping him now would confirm everything, and they knew it. He reached the door, opened it, and stepped out. The hallway felt colder, sharper. Laura was already waiting. Her eyes searched his face. "Sir, how is the house?" Daniel asked. "No incident," she said immediately. "Security confirmed. Everything's clear." "Of course it is." Daniel nodded once. "Good." Laura hesitated. "That call. It didn't feel right." "It wasn't," Daniel said. They began walking, fast, but not rushed. "Lock down all incoming communications," he continued. "Nothing gets through without verification." "Yes, sir. And get legal on standby. I want documentation ready within the hour." Laura nodded, already typing. Daniel stopped briefly at the window. The city stretched below, endless, unforgiving. "Sir," Laura asked. Daniel didn't look at her. "They tried to pull me out," he said quietly. "Yes. They needed me somewhere else." Laura followed his gaze. "Why?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Because whatever they're doing," he said, "they didn't want me in that room when it started falling apart." A pause. Then, "Or," he added, "they needed me somewhere they could control." Laura didn't respond. She didn't need to. They both understood. Daniel turned away from the window. "Get me everything on Langford Group," he said. "Every shell company, every transaction, every connection." "Yes, sir." "And Laura." She looked up. Daniel's voice lowered slightly. "Discreet. Always." They continued down the hall. Behind them, the conference room door remained closed. Inside, decisions were being made. Damage control, containment, maybe even escalation. Daniel stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut. For a brief second, the world narrowed to silence again. Just him, and his reflection. He loosened his tie slightly. A small movement, but telling. His phone vibrated once in his hand. Not a call. A message. He opened it. Security clear. No incident at residence. Below that, another message. Unknown number. Just one line. "You got lucky." Daniel stared at the screen for a moment. Then he typed 3 words. "I don't rely on luck." He hit send, locked the phone, slipped it back into his pocket. The elevator began to descend. And for the first time that morning, Daniel Carter allowed himself to think about something beyond the boardroom. A small girl, standing at a gate, seeing what no one else saw, saying what no one else would say. He exhaled slowly. "Truth doesn't come from power," he murmured under his breath. "It comes from whoever is paying attention." The elevator doors opened, and Daniel stepped out, not into safety, but into a war that had just begun. The city didn't slow down just because Daniel Carter stepped into a war. Outside the building, traffic moved the same way it always did. Impatient, relentless, unaware. A cold wind cut between the skyscrapers, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and early winter. Daniel paused just beyond the glass doors. For a moment, he didn't move, not because he was unsure, because he was thinking. "Car's ready, sir," one of the security men said. Daniel nodded, but his eyes weren't on the car. They were on the reflection in the glass. Not the man people saw, the one they expected, but the version of himself that had just made a decision he couldn't undo. "You're not walking away from a deal. You're declaring war." He stepped forward. The door opened. The world rushed back in. He got into the car. "Home," he said. The word felt different now. Not just an address, a point of vulnerability. The car pulled into traffic again. This time, Daniel didn't look at his phone. He didn't check messages. He didn't review numbers. He looked outside, watched, learning, the same way Annie had. "Sir," the driver said after a moment, "security wants to reroute." "Standard precaution." Daniel shook his head. "No. A beat. We stay predictable." The driver hesitated. "That makes us easier to track." Daniel's gaze stayed forward. "They're already tracking us." Silence. Then the driver nodded. "Understood." The car continued on its original path. Daniel leaned back slightly. His mind was no longer in the boardroom. It was reconstructing. The gate, the men, the camera angle, the call, the second call, the message. "You got lucky." No, that wasn't luck. That was a failed expectation, which meant they would adjust. People like Victor Langford didn't stop. They adapted. Daniel's fingers tapped lightly against his knee. "Call Marcus," he said. "Head of security?" the driver asked. "Yes." A moment later, the line connected. "Marcus speaking. I want full perimeter lockdown," Daniel said. "Effective immediately." A pause. "Sir, we already increased coverage after the—" "Not increased," Daniel cut in. "Locked." His tone sharpened just enough. "No blind spots. No rotation gaps. I want eyes on every access point." Marcus didn't argue. "Yes, sir. And Marcus." Another pause. "This isn't random. I figured." Daniel glanced out the window. "They tried to pull me away from the house, so they could hit it." "Yes. A beat. Or confirm how I react," Daniel added. Marcus was quiet for a second. "Either way," he said. "We're tightening everything." "Good." Daniel ended the call. The car turned onto a quieter street now. Familiar. Close. Daniel felt it again. That instinct, the one Annie had warned him about. What if something had happened? What if this time it was real? He closed his eyes briefly. That's how they get you. Fear didn't have to be real. It just had to feel real. He opened his eyes again. "No calls get through unless verified," he said. "Yes, sir," the driver replied. They drove in silence after that. But it wasn't empty silence. It was preparation. By the time the gates came into view, Daniel had already made 3 decisions. He wouldn't react. He wouldn't assume. And he wouldn't underestimate them again. The car slowed. The gates opened. Security was already in position more than usual. 2 additional vehicles. Men stationed at angles that suggested someone had rewritten the standard protocol. "Good." Daniel stepped out. The air felt different here. Not safer, just quieter. Controlled tension. Marcus approached immediately. Tall, direct, no wasted words. "Perimeter's secure," he said. "We swept everything twice." Daniel nodded. "The men from earlier?" he asked. "Gone." "Of course they were. They got what they needed," Daniel said. Marcus studied him. "And what's that?" Daniel's eyes moved toward the gate. "They wanted to see if I'd turn around." A pause. "And you didn't?" "No." Marcus gave a small nod. "That changes things." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "It does." He started walking toward the house, then stopped. His gaze shifted. To the side of the driveway, near the edge of the gate, there on the concrete, faint chalk lines, curved, uneven, a child's drawing. A road, no arrows, no turns, just a straight line forward. Daniel stared at it for a moment. Then, "Where is she?" he asked. Marcus followed his gaze. "The girl?" "Yes. Inside, I think." "Staff quarters." Daniel nodded once. "I want to speak with her." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, with everything going on, she saw them before we did." That ended the discussion. Marcus gestured toward the house. "I'll have someone bring her." "No," Daniel said. "I'll go." He walked toward the side entrance. The part of the house most people like him never used. The part where work happened. where people like Annie existed without being seen. Inside, the air was warmer, quieter, the sound of dishes somewhere in the distance, voices low and routine. Normal life. Daniel moved through it without announcement. A few staff members glanced up, surprised, unsure whether to greet him or step aside. He didn't stop. Then, at the end of the hallway, he saw her. Annie sat on the floor, a small notebook open in front of her, drawing with the same piece of chalk she had earlier. She didn't notice him at first. Or maybe she did, and chose not to react. Daniel stopped a few feet away. Annie. She looked up, no surprise, no fear, just recognition. You didn't turn around, she said. Daniel felt something shift again. No, he replied, a small nod, like she expected nothing less. They called you, didn't they? She asked. Daniel studied her. How did you know? She shrugged slightly. They said they would. Simple, matter of fact. Daniel crouched slightly, lowering himself closer to her level. They were watching, he said. Recording. Annie nodded. I saw. A pause. Then, they're going to try again, she added. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because he already knew, and hearing it from her didn't make it less true. It made it clearer. Yes, he said finally. They are. Annie looked back down at her drawing, then added one small thing. At the end of the straight road, she drew a door, closed. Daniel watched. What's that? He asked. She didn't look up. That's where they think you'll stop, she said. A beat. Then, quietly, but you're not supposed to stop there. Daniel stood slowly, his mind already moving again, adjusting, recalculating. This wasn't over. It had never been just one move. And now, neither was he. Annie, he said. She looked up again. Next time, he asked. What do I do? She thought about it, just for a second, then answered, you keep going. No hesitation, no doubt. Daniel nodded. All right. He turned, walking back toward the front of the house, toward the next move, because now he understood something he hadn't before. The trap wasn't just about making him turn back. It was about making him stop thinking, and he wasn't going to give them that. Not now. Not ever. That night, the house did not sleep. It pretended to. Lights dimmed. Doors closed. Voices softened into whispers. But beneath the surface, something had shifted like the quiet before a storm that everyone could feel, even if no one said it out loud. Daniel stood in his study, jacket off, sleeves rolled once at the forearms. The room was lined with dark wood shelves, books arranged more for structure than for reading. A glass of untouched whiskey sat on the desk. Across from him, Marcus reviewed a digital layout of the property. We've doubled outer perimeter coverage, Marcus said. Thermal scans every 15 minutes. Cameras recalibrated, no blind zones. Daniel nodded slightly. And inside? Minimal rotation, Marcus replied. No new faces. Everyone stays where they are. Daniel's eyes moved to the screen. A grid of lines, angles, sight paths, control, all of this, Daniel said quietly, and they still got close enough to watch. Marcus didn't argue, because that was the truth. They didn't need to get inside, Marcus said. They just needed visibility. Daniel exhaled slowly. And now they have it. A pause. They know how we respond, Marcus added. Daniel turned away from the screen. Not exactly. Marcus frowned slightly. Daniel's voice lowered. They know how most people respond. He glanced toward the hallway, toward where Annie had been sitting earlier. But not everyone. Marcus followed his gaze. That girl, he said, thoughtful. She sees things differently. Daniel nodded once. Yes. A quiet settled between them. Then, what's the next move? Marcus asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He walked to the window. Outside, the gate stood still under soft lighting. Shadows stretched long across the driveway. Everything looked calm. Too calm. They'll escalate, Daniel said finally. How? Daniel's reflection stared back at him in the glass. Pressure, he said. Not just on me. Marcus's expression tightened. The staff. Yes. A beat. They'll look for the weakest point. Silence. Both men understood what that meant. Marcus spoke first. I'll assign additional protection to all staff members. Daniel shook his head. That's not enough. Marcus waited. Daniel turned back. They don't need to break security, he said. They just need to break trust. The words lingered. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. You think they'll try to turn someone inside? Daniel didn't hesitate. I would. Another silence. This one heavier. Then, I'll start background reviews again, Marcus said. Everyone. Daniel nodded. Quietly. Of course. Marcus gathered the tablet. I'll update you in an hour. Daniel gave a small nod. Marcus left. The door closed softly behind him. And just like that, Daniel was alone again. The silence returned. But now, it wasn't empty. Daniel walked slowly across the room. His eyes moved over the details. The desk, the chair, the glass, all the things that used to define control. Now they felt insufficient. He picked up the whiskey, held it for a moment, then set it back down untouched. His mind drifted, not to the boardroom, not to Victor, but to a chalk drawing on concrete, a straight line, a door at the end. You're not supposed to stop there. Daniel leaned against the edge of the desk, closed his eyes briefly. When did I start listening to a 6-year-old more than my entire security team? The answer came faster than expected. When she was right, a soft knock at the door pulled him back. Come in. The door opened slowly. Maria stepped inside. Annie's mother. She looked tired, more than usual, not physically, emotionally. Mr. Carter, she said quietly. Daniel straightened slightly. Maria. She hesitated near the doorway, as if unsure how far she was allowed to step into his world. I wanted to thank you, she said. For what? For keeping us safe. Daniel studied her. I didn't do that, he said. She gave a faint, almost sad smile. You did more than most would. A pause. Then, Annie told me what happened, Maria added. Daniel's expression didn't change. She shouldn't have been out there, Maria said quickly. I told her to stay inside, but she saw something important, Daniel said. Maria fell quiet. She's just a child. Daniel nodded. Yes, a beat, but she paid attention. Maria's eyes dropped. That's what worries me. Daniel understood that, more than she expected. People who pay attention, he said quietly, see things others miss, and that makes them. Maria hesitated. Targets? Daniel finished. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The room felt smaller suddenly. He stepped closer. Nothing is going to happen to her, he said. Maria looked up. There was something fragile in her eyes. Hope, mixed with fear. You can't promise that, she said. Daniel paused. Sage's voice echoed faintly in his memory. You can't promise that. He exhaled slowly. No, he admitted. I can't. The honesty landed harder than reassurance would have. But I can make it very difficult, he added. Maria studied him, trying to decide if that was enough. It had to be, because it was all anyone could offer in a world like this. Thank you, she said again, this time quieter, more real. She turned to leave, then stopped. Mr. Carter? Yes. Maria hesitated. Then, she trusts you, she said. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Children don't do that easily, she added. A beat. Don't prove her wrong. The door closed behind her. Daniel stood still, her words settling into the room, into him. Don't prove her wrong. He walked back to the window, looked out again. The gate, the shadows, the line between safety and danger. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a boundary. It felt like a line someone was waiting for him to cross. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. No, he murmured. Not their line. Not their rules. His phone buzzed. A secure line. Marcus. Daniel answered. Talk to me. We found something, Marcus said. Daniel's focus sharpened instantly. What kind of something? A vehicle, Marcus replied. 2 blocks out, parked for over 6 hours. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. And camera equipment inside. Long-range lens. Professional grade. Of course. They're still watching, Marcus added. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. Marcus paused. Good? Daniel's voice was calm. If they're watching, he said, they're not finished. A beat. And if they're not finished, his gaze hardened. Then neither am I. Silence. Then Marcus spoke again. What do you want to do? Daniel didn't hesitate. Let them watch. Another pause. Then, but this time, Daniel added quietly, we show them something they're not expecting. Outside, the night remained still, but something had changed. The game wasn't just about avoiding the trap anymore. Now, Daniel Carter was stepping into it. On purpose. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the same chair by the window, long after the house had gone quiet, watching the reflection of a man who had finally stopped reacting and started anticipating. Let them watch. The words he had spoken earlier didn't feel like strategy anymore. They felt like a decision. Across the room, a digital clock shifted from 2:59 to 3 a.m. Time moved. So would they. Daniel stood slowly, rolling his shoulders once, loosening the stiffness that came from stillness, not from exhaustion. He wasn't tired. He was alert, more than he had been in years. His phone lit up. "Marcus, they're still there," Marcus said without greeting. "Same vehicle. No movement." Daniel walked toward the desk. "Good," he replied. A pause. "They've switched drivers once," Marcus added. "Professional rotation. They're not amateurs. I didn't think they were." Daniel looked down at the layout Marcus had sent earlier. Camera angles, sight lines, blind zones that no longer existed. "They're waiting for something," Marcus said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "What?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Movement. Silence." Then Marcus understood. "You want to give them something to see." Daniel's voice stayed low. "Not something. A beat. The right thing." Another pause. "That's risky," Marcus said. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. "So is letting them set the pace." Marcus exhaled slowly. "What's the plan?" Daniel looked toward the hallway again, toward the part of the house where Annie had drawn that straight line. "We changed the pattern," he said. "How?" Daniel picked up his phone again. "By making them think we didn't." Morning came quietly. Soft light crept through the windows. The house woke the way it always did. Routine, predictable, safe. Or at least, it looked that way. Daniel walked into the kitchen just as Maria was pouring coffee. She looked up, surprised. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Morning." His tone was calm. "Normal. Too normal." Maria studied him for a second. "You didn't sleep." It wasn't a question. Daniel took the cup she offered. "I don't need much." She didn't push. People like her knew when not to ask more. Annie sat at the small table near the window, swinging her legs, eating cereal from a chipped blue bowl. She looked up as soon as Daniel entered, like she had been waiting. "You're doing it today," she said. Daniel paused, coffee halfway to his lips. "What am I doing?" he asked. Annie tilted her head slightly. "The thing where you let them see something." Daniel held her gaze. A slow breath left him. "You've been thinking," he said. She shrugged. "I always think." A small silence settled between them. Maria glanced back and forth, confused. "What are you two talking about?" "Nothing," Daniel said calmly. Annie didn't argue. She just went back to her cereal. But Daniel noticed. She didn't look away from the window. "Not really. Always watching." Daniel set the cup down. "Maria," he said, "today I want you and Annie to stay inside." Maria frowned slightly. "We always stay inside. More than usual," he clarified. A pause. Something in his tone made her nod. "Okay." Daniel looked at Annie. "You too." She met his eyes. "Are you going to listen this time?" she asked. Daniel didn't smile. "I am listening." A beat. "Good," she said simply. No praise, no relief, just expectation. Daniel turned and walked out. By mid-morning, the house moved into motion. Vehicles came and went. Staff followed routine. Security stayed visible but not excessive. Exactly the way it always looked. But underneath, everything had changed. Marcus approached Daniel near the front steps. "Vehicle is still in position," he said quietly. "No approach. No signal activity." Daniel nodded. "Good. You're sure about this?" Daniel looked toward the gate. The chalk drawing was still there, faded slightly, but visible. "They're waiting for me to make a mistake," he said. Marcus crossed his arms. "And you're going to give them one?" Daniel's eyes didn't leave the gate. "I'm going to give them what looks like one." A pause. Then, a car pulled up, different from the usual. Not the armored vehicle, not the primary, a secondary car. Marcus noticed immediately. "This isn't standard." "No," Daniel said. "It's not." He stepped toward it. The driver opened the door. "Sir." Daniel got in without hesitation. Marcus stepped closer. "This changes our coverage," he said. "I know. They'll notice." Daniel glanced at him. "That's the point." The door closed. The engine started. And just like that, the pattern broke. 2 blocks away, inside a parked vehicle, a man adjusted his lens. "Movement," he muttered. Beside him, another man leaned forward. "That's not his usual car." "No," A pause. Still him. The man with the camera zoomed in, focused, then nodded. It's him. A slow smile spread across the second man's face. Finally, inside Daniel's car, the city rolled past again. Same streets, same rhythm, different game. Route is unchanged, the driver said. Daniel nodded. Good. He leaned back slightly, eyes forward, not checking, not reacting. The car passed the usual turn, then another. Then, a phone rang. Loud, sharp. Inside the car, the driver glanced at the dashboard. Unknown number, he said. Daniel didn't move. Let it ring. The driver hesitated. It rang again. Longer this time. More urgent. Daniel's hand rested calmly on his leg. Still, controlled. The ringing stopped. Then, a message notification. The driver glanced again. Text message. Daniel's voice stayed even. Read it. The driver swallowed slightly. Your house. Emergency. Staff injured. A pause. The car slowed just slightly. Instinct. Human. Daniel saw it. Keep driving, he said. The driver tightened his grip on the wheel. Yes, sir. Behind them, unnoticed, a second vehicle began to move. 2 blocks back. Following. Inside it, the man with the camera lowered his lens. He didn't turn. The other man frowned. Not yet. They watched. Waited. But Daniel's car didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. Didn't react. It kept going. Steady. Forward. Inside the car, Daniel looked out at the road ahead. And for a brief moment, he heard Annie's voice again. If they call you, don't turn around. His jaw tightened slightly. Not from fear. From certainty. They're close. Marcus's voice came through the earpiece. Daniel didn't respond out loud. Just listened. Second vehicle confirmed. Following at distance. Daniel's eyes shifted slightly in the reflection of the window. He saw it. A shape. A presence. There it is. He leaned back again. Calm. Deliberate. They think this is the moment, Marcus said. Daniel finally spoke. Let them think that. The car continued forward. Unchanged. Unshaken. But now, the trap had flipped. Because Daniel Carter wasn't the one being led anymore. He was the one choosing where it ended. The city lights blurred past Daniel's window as the car moved steadily forward. Every block felt heavier than the last. Like the pavement itself carried the weight of what was waiting. His hands rested lightly on his lap, fingers flexing subtly, barely noticeable, but alive with calculation. The secondary vehicle stayed 2 blocks behind, persistent but distant enough to not force a reaction. They're patient, Marcus said calmly over the earpiece. Adjusting with every movement we make. Daniel didn't respond. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Patience was a weapon, and right now, he was letting them wield theirs. The call from an unknown number still hung in the back of his mind. The message had been simple. Urgent. Your house. Emergency. Staff injured. But he hadn't reacted. That had been the test. And they had failed it. Secondary vehicle confirming position, Marcus added, his voice clipped. They're not making any moves yet. Daniel's gaze shifted to the side mirror. He could see the headlights faintly, just like he knew he would. He imagined the men inside, calculating, assuming panic, waiting for a turn, a hesitation, waiting for a crack, waiting for fear. They expect a mistake, Daniel said finally, voice quiet but firm. Give them one that doesn't exist. The car turned a corner. The city noises dimmed slightly, replaced by the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of traffic. Every red light, every pedestrian crossing, every honk was now a calculation. The team had cleared the area near the house for now, but Daniel knew that was temporary. The real threat wasn't proximity, it was control. They're going to push someone to act, Marcus warned. Probably a staff member. Test loyalty, test routine. Daniel exhaled. Steady. Let them try. At the next intersection, the secondary vehicle adjusted. Faster. Closer. The men inside didn't see his eyes. They didn't see the set of his jaw or the way his fingers tapped a silent rhythm. They didn't see that he was aware of every predictable thought they could be having and a few unpredictable ones they wouldn't. He thought about Annie, 6 years old, sharp, fearless, unassuming. The way she had watched, The way she had warned him, "Don't turn around." Her words echoed clearly now, almost a mantra in his mind. Keep moving forward. Don't look back. The car approached the small bridge over the river, a natural choke point. Any misstep, any hesitation, and the vehicle behind could have maneuvered closer. Daniel didn't accelerate or brake unnecessarily. He maintained a steady pace, controlled, confident. Marcus's voice crackled again. "Sir, they're attempting a maneuver, positioning themselves for a side intercept near 5th Street. Daniel's lips tightened slightly. That was predictable. He had already mapped 5th Street from previous surveillance. There was an alley that intersected there, a shortcut only he and Marcus would know about. A place they could isolate the threat if necessary. "Guide them," Daniel said simply. "Let them think they're in control. I'll create the real exit." A pause. Then Marcus replied, "Copy," adjusting team deployment accordingly. Daniel leaned back, eyes scanning the horizon, imagining the men behind the camera. They were confident, smug, convinced. Their patience and foresight were superior. Yet here he was, moving exactly where he wanted them to see him move, yet nowhere near where they expected. The call from earlier flashed again in his mind, family emergency. A classic lure. They had tried it before. They would try it again. Daniel didn't flinch at the thought. The car in front, his team inside, Marcus monitoring every access point. They had rehearsed this scenario, had prepared for this kind of manipulation. The bridge loomed closer. Daniel's hands flexed subtly, reassuring himself. The city had a rhythm, it had blind spots, and he was taking advantage of every single one of them. As the secondary vehicle followed the same path, the men inside leaned forward, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They didn't see his reflection in the glass. They didn't see the calm precision in his movements. They assumed control, and that assumption would be their undoing. Daniel reached the far side of the bridge. Ahead, the alley opened subtly to the right. Traffic allowed a narrow passage for his car to slip through, unnoticed by anyone expecting him to continue straight. Marcus's voice came steady and calm, but heavy with awareness. "Sir, this is the lane. Timing is tight." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I know." The alley was dark, flanked by tall brick walls, shadows hiding every possible threat, perfect for the diversion he had planned. The car behind moved faster, drawn by the predictable pattern. Daniel's vehicle slowed slightly, just enough to create the impression of hesitation. The men in the secondary car perked up, adjusting angles, trying to anticipate. Then Daniel executed the turn. A clean, precise maneuver that placed the secondary vehicle directly in the line of sight of his team's hidden Overwatch units. Suddenly, they were being observed, not the other way around. Marcus's voice came with a hint of restrained excitement. "They're in visual range. All units ready." Daniel allowed himself the smallest nod, even though no one could see it. The trap had flipped. Now the hunters were the hunted. He could hear the faint hum of surveillance equipment picking up the secondary car's movement. Every angle recorded, every blind spot covered. The alley funneled the men right into a corridor Marcus and Daniel had prepped with additional security. Daniel's eyes scanned ahead. No children, no staff. Only him, the shadows, and the city. But he knew that the smallest misstep now could compromise everything. Every turn, every stoplight, every pedestrian could be a variable. He remembered Annie's words again. "If they call, don't turn around." That simple instruction had saved him once, and it was saving him again. The secondary car approached the alley entrance. Daniel slowed slightly, giving the appearance of caution. The men inside leaned forward, anticipation on their faces. They thought they were in control. Then the alley narrowed further. Marcus's team positioned themselves, unseen, ready to intercept. Daniel maintained calm. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply drove forward, eyes locked ahead. The secondary vehicle followed, assuming he was oblivious. A critical miscalculation. Daniel's team intercepted flawlessly, blocking their exit and illuminating the area with precise lighting. The men inside realized too late that they had been funneled into a controlled space. Daniel continued forward, passing the scene without breaking pace. He didn't look back. The The secondary car, now contained by Marcus's units, could do nothing. Their cameras captured everything, but the narrative was no longer theirs. Finally, Daniel emerged from the alley, back onto the main street. Traffic normal, pedestrians moving as if nothing had happened. He exhaled, a subtle shift in his posture, but his eyes remained vigilant. The city around him was unaware. But Daniel knew. He had gained the upper hand. He tapped his earpiece. Status: all units in position. Threat neutralized. No injuries. Secondary vehicle contained, Marcus reported. Daniel nodded. Good work. Let's return home. As the car pulled back toward the house, Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The game was far from over. But for the first time, he had turned the tables, and now, they would have to play by his rules. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the war that had just been waged in plain sight. Inside the car, Daniel's hands rested lightly on his lap again. Calm, controlled, calculating. Forward, always forward, and somewhere, in the shadows, Annie's small voice echoed in his mind. Don't turn around. He wouldn't. Not today. Not ever. Daniel's car slipped back onto the main street, the city waking slowly around him. Morning sunlight glinted off windows and wet asphalt, washing everything in gold and pale blue. He exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of traffic ground him after the tension of the alley. Every turn, every pedestrian, every honking horn was a reminder that life went on. Unaware of the silent battles fought in the shadows, Marcus's voice came through the earpiece, calm but measured. Sir, all units report in. Secondary vehicle is secured. No injuries. Cameras recovered. Daniel nodded, though Marcus couldn't see him. Good. Keep them contained until law enforcement picks them up. Understood, Marcus replied. Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He looked down at his hands, resting lightly on his knees. Fingers flexed slightly, tension leaving slowly. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to think beyond the immediate danger. He thought of Annie, her small voice clear in his memory. Don't turn around. She had seen what even seasoned security professionals had missed. She had anticipated the danger, and she had guided him through it without fear. His gaze drifted to the reflection in the glass window beside him. A man who had lived his life calculating numbers, tracking profit and loss, now measured every human reaction, every instinct. He thought of the boardroom battles that had led him here, the partners who had promised allegiance and betrayed it, the legal maneuvers that had forced him into secrecy. And now he had realized something more fundamental. Trust was the real battlefield. The car turned another corner, and Daniel's eyes scanned the surroundings automatically. Nothing seemed out of place. The city was waking normally, pedestrians walking dogs, commuters hurrying along crosswalks, shopkeepers arranging displays. Yet in the periphery, he sensed the echoes of surveillance, the possibility of watchers lingering unseen. Sir, Marcus spoke again, I want to discuss the next move. Daniel leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second. We continue the plan, he said, but we need to anticipate escalation. They'll want a second attempt, maybe even a third. And this time, they'll test the staff. Marcus's jaw tightened. That girl, Annie, she's small, but her intuition is remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. Daniel opened his eyes and looked forward. She doesn't see the world the way we do. She sees what could happen, not just what does happen. That makes her dangerous, in a good way. Marcus hesitated. Sir, you want to involve her further? Daniel shook his head. Not yet. She's 6. Her role is observation, awareness, and warning. That's all she needs to do right now. She doesn't need to engage beyond that. The car approached a familiar boulevard, lined with tall office buildings and coffee shops. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and exhaust fumes. He exhaled again, feeling the subtle weight of responsibility pressing down not just for himself, but for everyone who depended on him. The stakes had escalated far beyond the boardroom. They'll try to manipulate through fear next, Daniel said. Phone calls, texts, anything that simulates an emergency at the house or with staff. We've already seen one attempt. Marcus's voice was quiet. I've reviewed the footage. They've been recording every movement for weeks. They thought they could predict you, but you've turned it around. Daniel allowed a faint smile, brief but genuine. Yes. And that's the first lesson they'll have to learn. I don't react the way they expect. I anticipate. And when anticipation fails, I create opportunity. Silence filled the car for a moment, broken only by the hum of the engine. Daniel's mind drifted to Annie again, picturing her small face pressed against the glass, her eyes sharp and alert. She had warned him to keep moving forward without hesitation. That guidance had saved him today. It might save him again tomorrow. They approached a narrow intersection. Daniel's hand rested lightly on the gear shift, his eyes scanning both sides. Predictable traffic patterns, yes, but there were always variables. A delivery truck, a cyclist, a pedestrian, distracted by a phone. Every variable was a potential threat or a potential advantage. Marcus's voice came through again. Sir, I'm preparing a briefing for the rest of the team. We need contingency plans in place for every possible escalation, including communication lures and false emergencies. Daniel nodded. Yes. But ensure that every staff member and security detail understands the protocol. No one acts on emotion. Observation, verification, and communication only. Understood, sir, Marcus said. I'll run a final check on cameras along all access points before the end of the day. Daniel leaned back in his seat, taking a deep breath. Good. And keep surveillance discreet. We don't need anyone knowing we're aware of their positions yet. Let them think they have advantage. They won't realize it's a trap until it's too late. The driver glanced briefly at Daniel in the rearview mirror. Sir, how long before we're home? Another 15 minutes, Daniel replied. Steady pace, no deviations. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the careful dance unfolding within its streets. Daniel's mind, however, remained focused entirely on the calculated tension between observation and action. He imagined the secondary vehicle 2 blocks behind, the men inside believing they had control, blind to the layers of strategy they couldn't comprehend. They passed the familiar gas station, the small corner diner where Daniel sometimes grabbed a quick coffee before early meetings. Today, it was irrelevant. Routine appearances, yes, but nothing predictable could be relied upon now. Marcus's voice crackled softly. Sir, heads up. We've detected another surveillance team on the northern route. Looks like a mobile observation post. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Good. Let them monitor. Let them think they're gathering intelligence. By the time they act, we'll have neutralized the opportunity for them to influence anything. A pause. Then Marcus added, they've been watching Annie's route as well. Notably, they observed her at the gate yesterday. Daniel's jaw tightened. Noted. Ensure she remains protected. Reinforce protocols. No unsupervised movement. No exceptions. Yes, sir, Marcus confirmed. Daniel turned slightly, looking out at the streetlights beginning to flicker off as sunlight strengthened. The city's ordinary rhythm offered a deceptive calm, but Daniel's senses remained honed. Each movement, each shadow, each reflection in a window could reveal another piece of the puzzle or another threat. We're almost home, the driver said. Daniel nodded once. Silent. He knew the house would seem ordinary, calm, routine, familiar, but nothing about today had been ordinary. Not the alley maneuver, not the intercepted secondary car, not the knowledge that the surveillance teams were still active. Today had been a victory, but it was only the first phase. He exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally, but his mind did not. Forward thinking, anticipation, observation. These would be necessary at every moment until the threat was fully contained. Annie's words played again in his mind. Don't turn around. Simple advice from a 6-year-old. Yet, it had proven essential. Daniel straightened in his seat. He would not turn around. He would not hesitate. He would continue moving forward, always forward, because in a world where danger lingered in every shadow, hesitation was the true enemy. And as the car pulled into the driveway, past the familiar gates, Daniel Carter knew that the game was far from over, but he was no longer the prey. Today, he had set the rules. Forward. Always forward. And the city, indifferent and bustling, could not touch him yet. The car rolled quietly into the driveway, and Daniel Carter remained seated for a moment, hands resting lightly on his knees, watching the shadows stretch across the familiar gates. The city's hum faded behind him, replaced by the quiet stillness of the estate. But Daniel's senses were still alert, scanning for anomalies, any movement that might suggest the threat hadn't fully dissipated. Marcus's voice came softly through the earpiece. Perimeter secure, all units in position. Secondary surveillance teams contained and monitored. Daniel nodded subtly, although Marcus could not see him. Good. Keep eyes on all exits. We can't assume this is over until every variable is neutralized. The driver opened the door and Daniel stepped out, the morning air cool and sharp against his skin. He took a slow breath, appreciating the calm while recognizing its fragility. The driveway, the gate, the trimmed hedges, they all looked ordinary. But he knew better. Danger could appear at any moment, disguised as routine. Inside the house, Maria moved quietly, preparing breakfast while keeping an eye on Annie. The 6-year-old sat at the small kitchen table, legs swinging, coloring in her notebook. Her bright eyes tracked Daniel as he entered, assessing him with a seriousness that belied her age. "Everything okay?" Maria asked cautiously. Daniel set down his briefcase. "Yes, all clear." Annie didn't respond immediately, eyes fixed on the page she was drawing. Then she looked up, expression tense. "You weren't supposed to turn around, were you?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I didn't. That's the important part." Annie nodded once, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Daniel watched her for a moment, reflecting on how such a small child had become a pivotal part of his awareness. The precision of her observations had guided him through traps that even trained professionals had underestimated. "Breakfast is ready," Maria said softly. "Sit down, please. You need to eat." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat, folding his hands on the table. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and lightly toasted bread filled the room. Normality was comforting, yet fleeting. "Sir," Marcus's voice returned in the earpiece. "There's an update from the team near the northern route. The secondary surveillance unit that was following you is now contained in a secure location. No further movement detected." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Good. Make sure law enforcement is informed. They need to handle the legal containment. I don't want a repeat of last time." "Yes, sir. Already in progress." The calm of the kitchen contrasted sharply with the tension that had ridden alongside him in the car. Daniel sipped his coffee, thoughtful. The city beyond the windows felt ordinary. But he knew the calculations behind every shadow, every pedestrian, every turning vehicle. Every unremarkable alley could mask observation. Annie's voice pulled him back. "Are they gone for good?" Daniel set his cup down, meeting her gaze. "For now. But they'll try again. People like that don't give up easily." Annie frowned slightly. "So, we have to keep watching?" "Yes," Daniel said gently. "But we also have to live. Keep aware, but don't let it control your day." Her small face reflected understanding beyond her years. "Like a game," she said. "Exactly," he replied, "but a serious game." Maria spoke from across the room. "You shouldn't carry all of this yourself, Daniel. Let us help. Let Annie and me play our parts safely." Daniel nodded. "We will. That's why Marcus has eyes everywhere, and why you stay inside until the immediate threat is gone." Breakfast passed quietly. The clinking of silverware and sips of coffee were mundane but grounding. Daniel's thoughts wandered to his company, the partners who had set this chain of events in motion. Every board meeting, every financial decision, every contract had consequences. He had discovered their illegal activities too late to prevent them from retaliating, but early enough to survive. After breakfast, Daniel moved to the study. He opened his laptop, reviewing security footage, overlaying the route from the morning. The secondary surveillance team had been clever, but predictable. Daniel replayed Annie's observation from yesterday, the small figure at the gate. The way she had noticed the men and anticipated their intentions. Her instincts had guided his actions. He paused at a frame showing the alley maneuver. The men in the vehicle had leaned forward, confident, oblivious. Daniel allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement of their arrogance. They had underestimated someone who relied on observation over brute force, foresight over reflex. Marcus's voice intruded gently. "Sir, you should rest briefly. Even an hour of downtime helps cognitive performance." Daniel shook his head. "I'll review everything first. We can't afford gaps in memory or observation. The next move has to be flawless." He studied the city grid on the screen, noting blind spots, potential choke points, and the pattern of secondary surveillance. Each block was a variable, each vehicle a potential disruptor. He imagined the men in the secondary vehicle, recalculating, replaying his movements mentally, unaware that the true control had shifted to him. Then Daniel leaned back, eyes narrowing at one detail. The surveillance team had missed a single point, an alleyway near the northern route. He noted it silently, mentally planning how it could be used to funnel or isolate potential threats next time. Small details mattered more than he had ever realized. The morning passed in careful observation and subtle planning. Maria prepared lunch quietly, while Annie played in the living room, still sharp, still watching. Daniel finally allowed himself a few moments of mental relaxation, though every instinct remained alert. He reflected on trust and vigilance. Annie's insight had been a reminder. Even the smallest participant could change the outcome when fear was managed and awareness was precise. A child's perspective, unburdened by overconfidence or ego, could see what adults missed. Later, as Daniel walked through the living room toward the front steps, he paused and looked back at Annie. "Keep watching," he said quietly, "but remember, observation doesn't mean acting alone. Report to me first." Annie nodded firmly, understanding the weight of the responsibility she carried even as a child. Daniel moved outside, feeling the sun warm his face. The city beyond the estate was alive, oblivious, chaotic in its own ordinary way. And yet, he knew the game was far from over. Every move, every observation, every decision would matter in the hours and days to come. As he stood there, looking at the familiar gates and the quiet driveway, he felt the first flicker of determination settle fully into him. He had survived the trap, flipped the script, and now controlled the immediate danger, but more challenges were coming. He would meet them with calm precision, guided by observation, strategy, and the unexpected insight of a 6-year-old girl who reminded him daily that awareness could be more powerful than force. And for the first time, Daniel Carter allowed himself to feel a cautious confidence. He had turned the tables, and he would continue to move forward. Always forward without hesitation, without turning back, and fully aware that the true battle was only beginning. Daniel stepped onto the patio, feeling the morning air brush against his face. The sun was higher now, washing the estate in sharp clarity. He watched the street beyond the gate, noting each movement, each shadow, every detail that might hint at a lingering threat. Even in the quiet, he knew the danger was never far, especially after the morning's maneuvers had exposed the secondary surveillance team to containment. Marcus's voice came through the earpiece, calm but firm. "Sir, perimeter secure. Secondary teams are still contained. No unexpected activity detected." "Good," Daniel said, his eyes scanning the street. "Keep surveillance active. Even minor movements could indicate preparation for escalation." Inside the house, Annie had already taken her position by the window. 6 years old, small and unassuming, but razor-sharp in awareness. She peered through the blinds, adjusting the notebook in front of her while keeping her eyes on the driveway. "Anything?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. Annie shook her head slightly. "Nothing yet, but I see the shadows. They're waiting." Daniel crouched to her level, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Good. That's exactly what we need. Watch, observe, and report. Nothing more. Do you understand?" Annie nodded firmly. "I understand. But if they call, I tell you first." "Exactly." Daniel's voice was calm, controlled. "No action without coordination. That's how we stay ahead." The house itself felt deceptively calm. Maria moved through the kitchen quietly, checking supplies, preparing lunch. She was aware of the tension, but trusted Daniel's control. The routine of cooking, organizing, and small domestic acts served as an anchor for everyone. A reminder that life continued even amidst threats. Daniel moved to the study, opening his laptop. He pulled in up the footage from the morning's movements, the alley maneuver, the secondary vehicle's interception, the blocked exits. It all played back with crystal clarity. He noted each variable, each action that could have gone wrong, but the execution had been precise, controlled, and efficient. Marcus spoke again. "Sir, we're reviewing the footage from the northern route. Looks like another team attempted observation. They missed a few key points." Daniel leaned back in the chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "Missed points can be turned into opportunities. Mark them. We'll use them to control the next engagement." He glanced at Annie, who was now drawing a map of the estate in her notebook, marking entrances, cameras, and even the street lights that could create shadows. Her small fingers moved with deliberate care. Every mark was intentional, and every mark demonstrated her understanding of space and strategy beyond her age. "You're very thorough," Daniel said, almost as an observation to himself. Annie looked up, eyes serious. "I have to be. I can't let them surprise you." Daniel allowed a faint smile. She had already proven herself indispensable. The way she had anticipated danger and given him guidance in the alley earlier had saved him. Her intuition was sharp, her awareness unparalleled, and her courage quiet but unwavering. Marcus interrupted the quiet. "Sir, we've confirmed the two operatives are currently being held. No access to communication or transport. They are isolated." Daniel nodded once. "Good. That removes immediate risk. But it doesn't remove their network. We have to anticipate further moves. They will escalate." The 6-year-old beside him leaned forward slightly. "They'll try to lure you again. Someone pretending it's an emergency at the house." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes. And next time, I'll rely on the same rule. No turning back. Observe, verify, and move forward. That's how we survive." Annie's eyes widened slightly. "Even if they say someone's hurt?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Even then. That's what you taught me this morning. The moment we turn around is the moment we walk into the trap." Maria moved closer, carrying a tray with fruit and coffee. "You both need to eat. Strength and focus," she said gently. Daniel accepted the cup, sipping slowly, letting the warmth center him. The ordinary actions of breakfast contrasted sharply with the extraordinary vigilance required outside these walls. The contrast was comforting, reminding him that while threats lurked, life still existed in familiar routines. "Sir," Marcus continued in the earpiece, "I recommend a brief debrief with the security team. Review the morning's events and update the threat matrix." Daniel nodded. "Yes, let's prepare for the next phase. Full analysis. Identify every variable, every blind spot, and every potential lure. We cannot leave anything unexamined." He looked at Annie again, small but resolute. "You did well this morning. Remember, it's not about fear. It's about awareness. Observation first, reaction second." Annie's gaze was steady. "I know. I'll be ready." Daniel rose and moved toward the front door. The air outside was still crisp, sunlight spilling across the driveway. He paused, letting the quiet settle. The city beyond the estate seemed peaceful, ordinary, unaware of the invisible chessboard being played. Marcus's voice broke through one last time. "Sir, all units remain on high alert. Additional surveillance will continue through the day. Any anomaly will be reported immediately." Daniel nodded silently. "Good. Forward observation only. No one acts without my call." He stepped outside, letting his eyes sweep across the estate. Everything seemed calm. But Daniel knew that calm was temporary. The city beyond could hide intent, and human cunning could never be underestimated. Annie followed him to the edge of the porch, her small hand brushing lightly against the railing. "I'll keep watch," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Good. Keep observing. Remember, patience and clarity are your allies." The day unfolded slowly, deliberately, with the security team in position and Marcus coordinating every move remotely. Daniel reviewed plans, ran scenarios, and mentally rehearsed potential outcomes. Every moment was calculated, every decision deliberate. By midday, Daniel allowed himself a brief rest in the study. He closed his eyes for a few minutes, letting his mind process the events, reviewing the morning's maneuvers and preparing for the next. He was exhausted, but vigilance didn't allow for true rest, not yet. He opened his eyes to find Annie drawing still, quiet but attentive, her notebook full of observations, her small fingers precise. "Excellent work," Daniel said quietly. "We'll need this for tomorrow's review. Every detail counts." Annie looked up, smiling faintly. "I want to make sure you're safe, and I know how to help." Daniel smiled, genuinely this time. "You've already helped more than anyone could imagine. Stay sharp, and we'll get through this." Outside, the city continued, oblivious to the careful orchestration within the estate walls. Daniel knew this battle was ongoing, that the threats would come again, and that vigilance would be the key to survival. He turned back to his laptop, reviewing camera angles, traffic patterns, and potential risk areas. Annie watched quietly from her perch, small but determined, and for the first time that day, Daniel allowed a moment of quiet confidence to settle over him. The trap had been turned once, but the game continued, and he was ready. Forward, always forward, never turning back, always aware, and always, carefully, watching every shadow. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the estate, as Daniel Carter continued his meticulous review of the morning's surveillance and maneuvers. Every camera angle, every street corner, every pedestrian flow was being mapped and analyzed in his mind. Even a minor lapse could mean catastrophe, and he refused to leave anything to chance. Marcus's voice crackled softly through the earpiece. "Sir, all units are reporting normal activity for now. No anomalies detected, but we're keeping all points under continuous observation." "Good," Daniel replied. He paused, studying a map overlay of the neighborhood. The alley maneuvers had been successful, but he knew the adversary's network was extensive and resourceful. They would try again. They always did. Annie, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her notebook, looked up at him with sharp, perceptive eyes. "They'll try to bait you again," she said. "Someone will pretend there's an emergency with the staff or the house." Daniel nodded slowly. "Exactly. And when that happens, we follow the rule. No turning back. Observe first. React only when we know the facts." He allowed a faint smile. "You've already taught me that today, haven't you?" Annie nodded firmly, her small hands gripping the pencil. "I don't want them to trick you." "Nor do I," he said quietly, his eyes scanning her face. There was a wisdom there, a calm awareness that belied her 6 years. "But we're ready." The morning passed in quiet vigilance. Maria moved through the kitchen, preparing light meals, her presence a stabilizing force in the house. The routine, simple, domestic, provided a small comfort, a reminder that life, even in its ordinary moments, could continue alongside vigilance. Daniel spent the time analyzing every potential point of vulnerability. Each street, each intersection, each potential approach was scrutinized. His team had been thorough, but the enemy's patience and cunning could not be underestimated. He glanced out the window, seeing the familiar street beyond the gate. It appeared calm, but Daniel knew better. Danger often hid behind ordinary appearances. He remembered Annie's eyes peering through the blinds earlier that morning, sharp and calculating, noticing what even trained eyes might miss. Marcus interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we've detected activity near the northern route again. Nothing immediate, but it warrants observation. Looks like a mobile surveillance unit has moved into position." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mark it. Keep them in view, but do not engage yet. Let them believe they have advantage. Misjudgment is a weapon." He returned to the study, notebook open, mapping the observed movements, noting blind spots, and identifying potential escape routes. Annie leaned over to watch him, her small frame dwarfed by the desk. "Sir," she said softly, "if they call, remember they want you to turn back. Don't. Keep going forward." Daniel's lips curved slightly. "I haven't forgotten. You've made sure I won't." The hours passed with careful monitoring, each moment filled with observation, planning, and a quiet tension that never fully lifted. Even the small domestic acts, checking locks, adjusting curtains, preparing meals, were performed with an awareness of the stakes. By late afternoon, the surveillance had yielded patterns. The adversary's operatives were persistent but predictable. Daniel studied the data, tracing movements and estimating reaction times. He could anticipate likely points of engagement, potential lures, and the paths the secondary teams might take. "Marcus," he said finally, "compile the data and prepare a full contingency plan. I want every potential route, every possible decoy, every communication channel accounted for, and cross-reference it with Annie's observations." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, the professionalism in his voice steady. Daniel looked at Annie. "You've been invaluable today. Your observations have allowed us to stay ahead." She shrugged slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm just doing what I can. I don't like surprises." "Neither do I," Daniel said, rising from the chair. He walked toward the front door, checking locks and scanning the immediate perimeter. The sun was lowering, shadows stretching long and thin across the driveway. "Ordinary appearances," he reminded himself. Ordinary appearances could conceal extraordinary danger. Annie followed, small footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "Sir, you need to be careful. They'll test you again." Daniel nodded. "I know, and we'll be ready. Forward, always forward." He stepped onto the porch, allowing the late afternoon sun to settle on him. The street beyond appeared normal. Children playing, cars passing, pedestrians moving at their usual pace, but Daniel knew to expect the unexpected. He surveyed the surroundings, noting every detail, the subtle shifts in light and shadow, every reflection that could reveal movement. Marcus's voice came one final time for the day. "Sir, all units remain on high alert. Any deviation from normal patterns will be reported immediately." Daniel nodded once, quietly. "Good. Keep observation discreet. Let them think they have the advantage they won't realize until it's too late." The calm of the estate was deceptive, but Daniel allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. The trap had been turned once. The morning's maneuvers had shown the operatives that he was not to be underestimated. He glanced at Annie again, small and steadfast, notebook in hand. "You've done exceptionally well today. Keep watching. Report every anomaly immediately. And remember, don't act alone." Annie's eyes were steady. "I won't. I'll stay ready." Daniel felt a cautious sense of relief. The immediate danger had been managed, but he knew this was only a single chapter in an ongoing strategy. Forward observation, careful analysis, and controlled action would remain essential. As the evening descended, the city beyond the gates continued unaware of the silent battles being waged within its streets. Daniel returned to the study, reviewing footage and notes once more, preparing for tomorrow. Annie settled in nearby, continuing her careful observations and notations. The quiet of the house, the ordinary domestic tasks, the warm light of evening, it all served as a temporary reprieve. Yet Daniel understood that vigilance would never truly leave him. The adversary would regroup. They would test him again, and he would meet it with foresight, precision, and a steadfast resolve informed by both experience and the unique insight of a 6-year-old who reminded him daily that awareness, patience, and courage could save lives. Forward. Always forward. Observing, calculating, prepared, and never turning back. The evening light softened the edges of the estate, shadows lengthening as Daniel Carter stood on the porch, surveying the street beyond the gates. The events of the past day had left his mind racing, each scenario replaying in meticulous detail. The trap that had been set, the surveillance detected, and the maneuvers executed, it was all part of a complex game where even the smallest misstep could have devastating consequences. Inside, Annie moved quietly, notebook in hand, following her usual routine of observation and documentation. Though only 6, her presence was a keystone in the defense Daniel had orchestrated. She had already proven her ability to anticipate danger and communicate it in a manner that even seasoned professionals respected. Today, that skill had saved him once, and Daniel knew it could again. "Marcus," Daniel said into his earpiece, "keep all units in observation mode for the next 48 hours. Any anomaly, no matter how minor, report immediately. and ensure no interference with Annie or household staff. Understood, sir, Marcus replied. Daniel's gaze swept the street. The city beyond the estate moved on as though nothing had happened, oblivious to the tension that had threaded the day. Cars passed by. Pedestrians moved along their routines, but Daniel knew that appearances could be deceiving. His adversaries were patient, calculating, and prepared to test him again. Maria moved past him in the kitchen, placing a tray with freshly brewed coffee and a small plate of pastries on the counter. "You've done enough today," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting concern and quiet admiration. Daniel nodded, taking a slow breath. "I know, but vigilance can't pause. Not yet." He glanced toward Annie, who looked up briefly, her small face alert. "And she's the reason we've maintained control so far. Her observation is unmatched." Annie's gaze was steady. "I saw the men. I knew what they were planning." "Yes," Daniel said softly, kneeling to her level. "And because of you, we stayed ahead. You understood that even if someone called and said there was trouble, we must not turn back. That's the rule, and it kept us safe." Annie nodded solemnly. "I won't forget." The calm of the house belied the complexity of the threat outside. Daniel moved to the study, reviewing footage from the morning and early afternoon, examining every angle, every potential point of intrusion. The secondary surveillance team had been clever, but predictable. The data showed where they had miscalculated, leaving traces Daniel could exploit if the threat escalated again. He paused on a frame showing the alley maneuver, replaying it slowly. The men had leaned forward, confident, unaware that the real calculation had been happening elsewhere in the mind of a 6-year-old girl who saw the pattern before anyone else. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile, acknowledging that insight and intuition often outweighed brute force and experience. Marcus spoke again, cautiously. "Sir, additional surveillance reports indicate no immediate activity near the estate, but operatives from the adversary's network are likely observing from multiple urban locations. They may attempt another tactic." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We expect it. That's why we've reinforced protocols. Observation first, verification second. Only then, action." The soft clinking of cups and plates came from the kitchen as Maria moved to tidy up. Daniel allowed himself a moment to sit back, to breathe, and to reflect. The ordinary domestic tasks, the preparation of food, the quiet conversations, the small gestures of routine, were vital. They anchored them, providing a sense of normalcy amid the ongoing vigilance. Annie moved to a chair by the window, notebook open, marking positions of cars, noting people on the sidewalk, detailing patterns in the environment. "I noticed a new vehicle," she said quietly, pointing to her drawing. "It stopped near the corner twice. I don't think it's a coincidence." Daniel examined her notes, appreciating the precision and clarity. "Good. That's exactly the kind of observation that can prevent a disaster. We'll have Marcus check it immediately." Marcus confirmed swiftly through the earpiece. "Vehicle confirmed. It's a rental. Occupants are unidentifiable from distance, but they have been near the estate at intervals matching potential operational windows." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Perfect. We anticipated the pattern, and now we track it. No surprises, no exposure. Let them think they control the narrative they don't." The day edged toward evening. Daniel walked to the gate, scanning the street one more time. The shadows stretched long across the pavement, the hum of city life continuing as usual. The contrast between ordinary life and the complexity of the battle he waged outside the public eye was striking. Annie followed closely, her small presence a reminder of both vulnerability and vigilance. "Sir, they might try to call the house next," she said. "Remember what we practiced, don't turn back. It's a trap." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "I won't. You've reminded me why we proceed forward. No matter what distractions are presented, we act with awareness, not reaction." Marcus's voice echoed one last update for the day. "Sir, all teams are in position for overnight observation. No anomalies reported. Routine continues. Any deviation, and you will be notified immediately." Daniel nodded. "Good. Maintain discretion. Do not alert the adversary. Let them believe they have control. Tomorrow, we consolidate gains, review every movement, and prepare for escalation. Forward observation and precise action remain our strategy. The night settled over the estate. Lights glowed warmly inside, contrasting with the darkened streets beyond. Daniel returned to the study, reviewing every note, every surveillance clip, every observation Annie had made. Each piece of information fit into a growing mosaic of control and anticipation. He paused, reflecting on the events of the past day. The alley maneuver, the intercepted secondary vehicle, Annie's acute observation, and the calculated actions that had neutralized the immediate threat. He realized the battle was far from over, but confidence now replaced the initial tension. Maria moved beside him quietly. "You're exhausted," she said softly. "I am," Daniel admitted. "But exhaustion is temporary. Awareness is permanent. And with Annie's guidance, we maintain both safety and control." Annie's small hand brushed against his notebook. "We did it today," she said. "We stayed ahead." "Yes," Daniel said, a faint smile crossing his face. "And we'll do it again tomorrow. Forward, always forward. Observation first, action second. Never turning back." The city beyond continued unaware, the ordinary hum of life persisting while the unseen chessboard of strategy and vigilance played out behind closed gates. Daniel Carter, guided by observation, intuition, and careful planning, felt the first quiet assurance that while the threats remained, he was no longer the prey. He had turned the tables, forward. Always forward. Observing, anticipating, prepared, and never, ever turning back. As night fully descended, Annie rested by the window, notebook closed but mind alert. Daniel sat at his desk, reviewing the final notes of the day, a quiet pride in his chest. Together, the unlikely team, one seasoned strategist and one extraordinarily perceptive 6-year-old, had held the line. And for the first time since morning, Daniel allowed himself to feel a measured sense of accomplishment. The threat had been mitigated, the trap had been navigated successfully, and the future, though uncertain, was, for the first time, guided by his foresight and Annie's fearless insight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, forward observation had ensured safety, control, and the knowledge that no matter the shadows or the traps laid ahead, they would face them prepared, together. The story teaches a powerful lesson about courage, awareness, and the value of vigilance. Even the smallest, seemingly powerless individuals like young Annie can make a profound impact when they observe carefully, act wisely, and trust in their insight. It also highlights the importance of forward thinking, staying calm under pressure, and relying on teamwork to overcome hidden dangers. Ultimately, it reminds the audience that bravery, attentiveness, and the willingness to act can protect others and turn the tide in life-threatening situations, proving that courage and prudence often matter more than strength or wealth. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.